KX. As you know, in KX, Mrs. Coffin and I love to read you stories. And every year in KX, for the past so many years that Mrs. Coffin and I have been together, we've been reading stories about a famous king named King Arthur. And there are several characters in the stories, or legends. They call them legends because these stories are very old. These stories come from the part of the world where England is. England and Ireland and Wales. In fact, this young woman here, her name is young Guinevere, and her story takes place in what we now call the country of Wales, which is part of the United Kingdom. But at some point, and this is true for a lot of places that are now countries, before countries became unified, for example, before England said, we're going to be called England and this is going to be our flag, it was actually a group of people, often speaking different languages and having different ideas about things and following different kings. And this is also true in countries like Japan and Italy and many more, too many to list. And countries often didn't become unified or decide to follow one leader until later in their history. So this young woman, her name is young Guinevere, and we're going to read a version of her story by Robert Sanssouci. And we're going to read part of the story today because it's a bit long, and as we would in KX, if we were in the classroom, we wouldn't finish this whole story in one sitting, okay? And this is an old book. Can you believe someone actually got rid of this book from their library? Young Guinevere. There you have Guinevere looking out. You see these shapes here, you call these crenellations. If you're interested in castles, guess what? You can do what I did when I was in college. You could take a whole class about castles. It's very fun. Here's a little introduction. The story of Guinevere's life as a child and young woman draws on a variety of classic and contemporary sources. So like King Arthur, Guinevere is such a familiar old legend that there are many different versions of her story, kind of like with Greek myths. I often tell you that this is one way the story is told and it could be told in this way. Here's another example. It also reflects the author's reading of the might-have-beens between the lines of legend, folktales, ballads, poems, and works of literature and history that touch all too briefly on Guinevere's early life. Which is true. If you started reading the story of King Arthur, you would meet Guinevere, but you would not meet her. You would meet her much later in life. She would be already a young woman, a married woman, let's say, about to be married woman. But here you get a sense of who she was as a child. When she was a child, Guinevere would often slip into the great hall of her father, King Leodogran, to gaze at the vast round table that filled half the chamber. She would trail her fingertips lightly across the table's lustrous, dark wooden surface, feeling a power that set her skin tingling. Her image reflected in the polished oak made her name seem fitting, for Guinevere meant white fairy, and the girl's skin was white as woodbine, framed with auburn hair. And here she is with her father. One of her earliest memories was standing beside her father, her tiny fingers twined in his rough, thick ones. With them was an old woman, a seer. So seer is someone that people believed had powers to make prophecies. Remember we talked about prophecies in Greek mythology? Someone who could know what would happen in the future. An old woman, a seer, nearly bald with yellow teeth, who sometimes advised Leodogran. Suddenly she pointed her finger at the round table, then at Guinevere. This table will be your dowry, child, the crone said, when the greatest king of all comes to claim you as his bride. And a dowry, by the way, was a custom back in the day where when a woman was married, when a young woman was married, her family would sort of give gifts to the family the girl was marrying into, okay? Which is called her dowry. I keep this. What does she mean, father? The girl asked Leodogran. I keep this for the future king of all Britain, he answered. It was made by Merlin the magician for King Uther, who gathered his greatest knights around it. It was at this very table that Uther and his knights planned their wars and dreamed their dreams of greatness. When Uther died and his only child was spirited away for safety by Merlin, the round table fell into my keeping. I was the old king's truest friend and ally. I have vowed to give this table to Uther's son when he comes to claim his kingdom. But why is she pointed at me? Asked Guinevere. Because you are to be queen of all this land, child, as surely as Arthur is to be its king, the old woman said. Who is this Arthur? Leodegrand demanded. I know of no such king. Your ally in time, she told the king. An ally is someone you align with or you work with, sort of the opposite of an enemy, a friend. And your husband in a little more time, said the old woman to Guinevere. Then, turning suddenly, she left the hall. So they just mentioned a whole bunch of names that are important to this story of King Arthur. And this story takes place before Arthur becomes the king of all Britain. And this story takes place, as I mentioned earlier, at a time before Britain was unified, before people decided to follow one person. Right now they're following a bunch of different kings. And Arthur's trying to convince them that it's best if they follow one and stop fighting each other. Even as a girl, Guinevere was tall and graceful, like her Roman ancestors who had once ruled Britain, and as intriguing to her as the Round Table were the vast woods that guarded the western wall of Leodegrand's castle, Cameliard. In summer, while she sat embroidering at her chamber window, Guinevere would note how the morning sunlight dusted the forest leaves with gold, and in the evening a soft mist wound red gold veils among the stars. She listened eagerly to her elders when they told tales of strange creatures that prowled through the shadows of the woods, or of secret glades where the fairy folk danced by moonlight. So this is a part of the world where they believed in fairies, KX. On the wall across from where the girl sat at her needlework was a bow decorated with gold and a quiver. That's where you hold your arrows. A quiver filled with peacock-feathered arrows. These had belonged to her mother, dead 7 years, and would be Guinevere's when she was older. In daydreams, she imagined herself as a huntress in the forest, like the goddess Diana, whom her Roman ancestors had worshipped. So a little history here of KX. Before this story takes place, there was a time where the Roman Empire, which, as you can probably guess, began in Rome, in what is now Italy. What had happened is that the city of Rome got to be very strong, very powerful. So they decided, well, one city is not big enough. And they took their armies and they went all across Europe and to Asia and Africa and tried to conquer more cities and people to be part of their empire. And the Romans did reach what is now Britain. And there was a period of time where Britain was controlled by Rome. And so Guinevere is remembering this time. And when Rome came to take over Britain, they not only brought their soldiers, but they brought their stories. And that's why Guinevere is thinking about the Roman goddess Diana, who you all might know in Greek mythology as Artemis. And here's a cool picture. Because rumors of war worried Leodegrand, he forbade his daughter, that means he told her she couldn't do it, to leave the safety of his castle. But courage, a strong will, and a certain impulsiveness were also part of Guinevere's inheritance from her mother. One morning, eager to visit the woods, she took the bow and arrow and slipped out a side gate, dressed as a serving girl. The sights and sounds and smells of the woods excited her. She tied her shift around her knees and bound her hair with a ribbon, like Diana the huntress. Following narrow paths made by deer, she soon went farther than hunters and woodcutters dared. By a stream, she glimpsed a unicorn. Later, a magnificent white boar burst from the underbrush. Though her bow was at the ready, Guinevere knew such magical creatures must not be harmed, so she's not going to just shoot at any animal. Do you have any connection? Here you have a young woman with a bow and arrow, and you have a unicorn, and she just mentioned a bow. Can you think of a Greek myth? Right? When lengthening shadows warned of nightfall, so she's in the woods at night, my friends, Guinevere realized that she was lost. The bird songs had died away and were replaced by the clamor of foxes and wolves. Fairy lights glimmered among the trees to lure wanderers into the snares of the magical forest. Suddenly, rounding a curve in the path, the girl came face to face with a young gray wolf feasting on a plump bird. It seemed as surprised as she. It snarled at her and appeared ready to spring, but Guinevere loosed an arrow, wounding it in one leg. With a nearly human cry, the beast fled in the gathering dusk. Not knowing what other dangers might lie ahead, Guinevere drew a second arrow and then continued along the path. Soon she was startled to hear a child weeping. Peering into the brush, she saw a naked, skinny boy crusted with dirt. The child was sobbing and holding his leg, which had been pierced by an arrow. Do you think that's a coincidence, KX? It is not. To her amazement, Guinevere saw that the arrow was her own, and she suddenly remembered stories of humans who could take on a wolf's form. Have you ever heard of stories where humans could take the shape of animals? Do you remember we read a story about a young man that could take the form of a seal, right? But there was nothing frightening about this hurting child, Guinevere decided. The boy seemed far more terrified of her, slightly eyeing her like a deer run to earth by a hunter. Softly and quietly, as she approached the strange child as she might approach an injured hawk or dog, then she stood still to let him take measure of her. Finally, she reached out a hand to stroke his hair. Thus she soothed him enough to remove the arrow and to bind his leg with a strip of cloth torn from her shift. When she was done, he suddenly bolted for the deep woods, as fast as his wounded leg would allow. "Stop!" Guinevere cried, but she dared not follow. Soon after this, she saw torches and heard the shouts of men calling her name. A few moments later, she met one of the search parties her worried father had sent her. Leodegrand alternately hugged and scolded his only child. Right? That makes sense. He's not happy that she went into the woods, but he must be so relieved that she's safe. But neither pleas nor threats could compel his daughter to promise that she would never again go into the woods alone. So even though Dad says don't go, who really wants to go into the woods? Thereafter, the king had her watched night and day, but Guinevere easily eluded her guardians. To say she eluded her guardians means she was, even though they were supposed to be watching her, making sure she didn't run off into the woods, she was able to get away. She was able to elude them. And so she learned the forest's secrets. But even her courage and curiosity could not make her cross the perilous river which ran through the woods, for on the opposite bank lived the beast. Some say the beast had haunted the forest since the dawn of time. One old storyteller claimed he could recall when a careless magician, by casting the wrong spell, don't ever do that, KX, had created the monster. All agreed it was the strangest and most dangerous creature in the woods. The thing had a serpent's head, a leopard's body, a lion's hindquarters, and a hare or rabbit's feet. So here we go. A serpent's head, a leopard's body, a lion's hindquarters, and the hare's feet. Once when it came along to the river's edge to drink, the creature saw Guinevere and gave a cry like the barking of 60 hounds. The sound made the girl shiver, though the swift flowing stream separating her from the beast kept Guinevere safe. So KX, again, can you think of any other stories we have read where you have a creature made up of other creatures, a sort of composite creature? Do you remember the chimera? That's just one example. Do you remember someone who lived in a labyrinth? So the idea of animals being sort of mixed with other animals happens in many parts of the world. On a chilly autumn evening, Guinevere returned to Cameliard, that's her family castle, and found the castle in an uproar. Horns sounded the call to arms. Soldiers milled around the courtyard. Servants ran everywhere carrying messages. The smithies, their powerful arms and leather aprons, gleaming red in the glow of furnaces, forged fresh blades for spears and swords. So here's a smithy, someone who works with metal. If you're going to go fight, you can't just go to Amazon and order more weapons, right? Back in the day, you had to have them made, and not everyone knew how to make them. People often had jobs for a long time, and so the smithy would teach his son the job, and his son would teach his son the job, and these jobs were passed down through generations. And that's why even today, if someone has a last name Smith, for example, that can mean that maybe someone in their roots had the job of working with metal, because your last name often gave hints as to what your family did. So imagine you had a name like Baker. What might you do? In the great hall, Guinevere found King Leodegrand seated at the round table, deep in consultation with his knights. "Father," she cried, "are we at war?" "We are," he replied. "King Ryan and his allies are at the gates of Cameliard. We are greatly outnumbered. So remember I told you a bunch of kings are fighting each other. So now a king named Ryan is attacking Cameliard. Why is King Ryan attacking us? His daughter asked. Ryan hopes to be ruler of all Britain, but I will not join him in his war against Arthur, who claims to be the rightful king, the son of Uther. I have heard that Arthur has pulled a magic sword from a stone as proof that he is the missing king. Guinevere said, Years ago, a wise woman told us a king named Arthur would one day be your ally and my, she said. She paused, blushing. Husband, her father finished. But Arthur will find neither a friend nor a bride when Ryan has reduced Cameliard to ashes. If you support King Arthur's claims, said Guinevere, surely he will come to our aid. By the time he learns what has happened, it will be too late. So these are the olden days, friends. If you're in trouble and you need your friends to come help you, you can't just text them. Right? So imagine your castle is about to be attacked by another person and you need your friends to come help you. How might you get your friends to help you? Her father thinks it's going to be too late. He says, I have already sent 3 messengers. So these are people that have to run the message to whoever you want to talk to. I have already sent 3 messengers, and each of them has been slain or died by Ryan's men. We are trapped by our enemies on one side and the forest on the other. But send a messenger through the woods, said Guinevere, right? Instead of sending them out through the front of the castle where people will see them, she's thinking, send them through the forest. No one can survive its perils, Leodegrand replied. Is that true, KX? Is there no one who could survive the perils of the perilous forest? Let me go, cried Guinevere. I know every forest path. So what has she learned, even though her father never wanted her to go out into the woods? As they say, knowledge is power, KX. Never, said Leodegrand. To reach Arthur at distant Tintagel Castle, you would have to cross the perilous river, and that is where the beast dwells. It means sure death. Ryan's siege is even sure death, said Guinevere quietly. My way holds a slender hope. So what King Ryan, his plan to lay siege, we talked about this, I believe, before when we talked about the city of Troy. So King Ryan's plan is just to camp out his entire army in front of King Leodegrand's castle and just wait out King Leodegrand until he runs out of food, and King Leodegrand will surrender is the idea. Because the siege means you're just waiting. You're just waiting the other person out. They argued for a long time, but Guinevere prevailed. Because her thinking is, yes, it's dangerous, but if we just sit here, we're just going to slowly run out of food and water, and we're definitely going to not, get out of this safely. But maybe if I go through the woods, there is a hope I get the message. What would you do, KX? Remember, she's his only daughter. Then King Leodegrand had the wisest men and women called in to tell Guinevere what they knew of the lands beyond the perilous river and the beast. They told Guinevere how to find the water bridge, a natural stone arch just below the surface of the river. That was the only way to cross. Beyond this, the king's advisors offered many warnings, but little help. So we're going to pause there, and then we're going to find out next time if she makes it through the woods and if she can get help in time for her family. I hope you like the story so far, KX.